I was living alone in a one-room micro-house and facing my first Halloween alone. That in itself was weird, but it got weirder when, a few days before the 31st, a girl from the neighborhood disappeared without a trace. No one had any idea why she left, but the cops thought someone had kidnapped her, which set off alarm bells for everyone, especially all the dads in town, who tried their best to make their kids feel safe to trick-or-treat on Halloween. The news spread like wildfire and the whole town was trembling with fear, fearing that the kidnapper would take advantage of Halloween to take more people, especially children. Despite my own nerves, I wasn't going to let that ruin my party, although I decided to stay home and hand out candy instead of going out. It was my first time doing it, after years of being the kid who only asked for candy. It's amazing how time goes by. I was now 19 years old and all grown up, so it was my turn to give candy to the little sugar-hungry monsters that knocked on my door. To my surprise, the streets were much more crowded than I thought, considering that everyone was scared because of what I mentioned before. Many dads were taking their kids to pick up candy, and things felt safer than I imagined. By about 10 p.m., most of the kids were going to bed and things were calming down a bit. So I turned off the lights and got ready to relax and watch a horror movie I had been looking forward to for ages. By the time I realized it was getting late, almost 2 a.m., I was about to turn off the TV and go to sleep when suddenly, someone started banging on the door. It was a loud and strange knock that made me jump. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to secure the door chain, because something in the air told me I had to be careful. And it turns out that my intuition wasn't wrong, because just as I turned the handle, a guy I had never seen before in my life tried to enter my house. I had to use all my strength to close the door. However, the man hit me hard in the face and almost broke my nose, but fortunately the chain did its job, and I managed to keep him out. Seeing that he had failed in his attempt to break into my house by force, the guy came even closer to look through the crack, but what I saw at that moment froze me cold. The guy was wearing a super realistic leather face mask. At the end, he stepped aside and smiled at me while saying, "Happy Halloween," with a leather bag in his hand, made of the same material as the mask, that is, pretending to be human skin. The guy made as if he was joking or asking for candy, but in the middle of all the madness, I just tried to pretend it was nothing, even though I wasn't amused by his attitude, and less so considering that a few days after that, a girl had disappeared so close to my house. This was no time to play the maniacal protagonist of a silly horror movie, and what I had just seen made me understand that this guy was not someone to play with. See, the costume was so realistic that I couldn't help but think that I had seen that face somewhere, like we had been childhood friends or something. I don't know exactly why that particular thought came into my head. Maybe I was hallucinating, but I shook those thoughts away and said, "Hey buddy, it's too late to be trick-or-treating, and you're old enough for that, don't you think? You should go home." "Oh, come on, don't be a party pooper. Look how much effort I put into this costume. You have no idea how long it took me to make it, and all I had to do to get the raw materials. That's why I'm here at this ridiculous hour and you're going to deny me a piece of candy," he said as he shot me an unsettling look. I didn't know why, but something in his words sounded very disturbing to me. "I'm sorry, but I already gave away all my candy," I told the guy, trying to get him to go away. "Can't you do one last check, see if you left anything out there?" He replied to me with a sarcastic tone. "Aren't you a little old to be making drama like a spoiled child?" I retorted. At that moment his attitude changed drastically. He dropped the teasing, half-mocking tone he had had so far, and said to me in a deep voice and in a very sinister manner, "I'll enjoy making a scarf out of your face." After those words, I could feel a shiver run down my back. "Get the hell off my property, or I'll call the police," I told him firmly, but more scared than angry. "Oh, don't make me laugh. I can see that bag of candy right there," he said, pointing to a bag he had on the coffee table near the door, and returning to the same teasing attitude as before. In a moment of weakness, I took my eyes off him and glanced over, but it was a big mistake. Suddenly, without my being able to notice, the guy reached out his arm and grabbed me by the neck. He was strangling me as he tried to pull me out. At the same time, I was struggling like crazy, punching him in the arm to get him to let go. We were both screaming, trying to hold off the other's attack, but in the middle of the fight, thank God, the chain was still tight. Otherwise, this would have ended much worse. Finally, even though the bastard almost broke my neck, I managed to scream for help a couple of times, and I was sure to wake up all the neighbors. I started punching his arm a lot harder, and when he loosened up a bit, I bit him so hard that I almost tore off a chunk of flesh and my mouth filled with the metallic taste of his foul blood. But it was effective because after what seemed like an eternity, he finally let go of me. At that moment, I fell to my knees on the floor, catching my breath as neighbors began to come out with bats and knives, curious about the commotion going on outside my house. Seeing this, the man ran away. It was only then that I unlocked the door and went outside to calm them down. I looked out and saw that the guy had dropped his bag just as he fled from the crowd. Wow, that really looks like human skin, I thought, feeling sick at the very idea. When the cops arrived, they took my statement and that of my neighbors and took the leather bag as evidence. That night I tried to forget what happened and sleep, but it wasn't long before I found out what the bag was really made of. And as you can imagine, it wasn't cowhide. It was actually human skin. However, the worst part came when forensics did the corresponding DNA tests, where they found that it matched that of the girl who had disappeared a few days earlier. Everything clicked in my head when I heard that. This was why the guy looked so familiar. Of course, I was seeing that face on the news just before Halloween. The man was caught a couple of days later, and upon raiding his house, they discovered the girl's body in a large refrigerator he had in his basement. But that was not all. Apart from the missing girl, they found another corpse that seemed to have been frozen for much longer. The subsequent forensic examination showed that it was a young waitress who had been missing for about a year. This caused a great commotion in the town. This guy had been living in the area for less than 2 years and hardly ever left his house, so not much was known about him. Upon learning of the heinous things he did, I was actually very thankful to have escaped alive from that bizarre encounter with him on Halloween night. This happened when I was about 8 years old. I was a hyperactive kid and I was left to do whatever I wanted, so I didn't hesitate to pick on the younger kids. In short, I wasn't the best kid on the street, that was for sure. My mom gave me everything I wanted and my dad thought that indulging me was the right way to raise me. Obviously, they were completely wrong, and that had a very negative impact on my life. I didn't have many friends because the kids in the neighborhood saw me as a threat. And even though their parents always complained about my attitude, my parents passed on that and said that I was the best and that the others were just jealous. Let me tell you something. When a parent minimizes their child's antics and supports them, even if it's wrong, this child will never grow up well. My parents made me feel that I could do whatever I wanted and that no matter what I did, they would always be on my side. It is true that parents should support their children, but by no means should they do so blindly and without setting boundaries. It was just before Halloween and the whole neighborhood was decorating with holiday decorations. As always, being the spoiled child, my dad brought me a bunch of decorations that would have covered a mansion with no problem. I was hanging a huge pumpkin on the porch when I saw some of my neighbors gossiping at the edge of the street. "What are you planning to do tonight?" I asked them, but I knew they were thinking about which houses to visit for trick-or-treating. "Can I join you?" I asked, but they replied, "No, you'd better not, you're a monster." That was the first time I realized how much everyone hated me, except my parents. And believe me, that felt horrible. But I was only 8 years old and had no one to tell me what was wrong with me. My parents always thought I was perfect, and that's what they made me believe. But the rejection from all my neighbors and my schoolmates made me think otherwise. So after that, I ran to my room and cried in the bathroom for a while. Then I was filled with rage and decided that I would trick-or-treat on my own, and that I would collect more than everyone else. I was very resentful, and like any spoiled child, I wanted to show the other children that I was better than them. When night came, all the children came out in their costumes. I lit the candles on my pumpkins with my dad and prepared for my own adventure. I didn't tell my parents that no one wanted to play with me. I wanted to keep them out of it. I decided to dress up as a vampire. My dad had bought me a cool cape with a high red collar, so I grabbed my bucket and went outside to beg for treats. The other kids were crowding the houses yelling, "Trick or treat." But I was determined to do my own thing. I started going from house to house asking for candy, but because of my bad reputation in the neighborhood, no one would give me more than 2 small pieces of candy. One of the homeowners even blurted out, "Why are you trick-or-treating? Your daddy can buy you anything you want. Get off my porch, you spoiled child." Tears began to fall from my eyes, and I couldn't take the humiliation any longer, so I decided to run away and hide from my miserable life. I ran through the woods aimlessly that Halloween night, lit only by moonlight. I didn't care where I went. I never thought that, at that hour, the woods were not the best place for an 8-year-old boy. After 10 minutes of running, I sat under a large leafy tree, crying my eyes out. I felt very lonely and humiliated. But at 8 years old, I was not able to recognize that it was my own fault. I thought everyone was an evil person. I don't know how long I was like that until I heard voices in the distance. I stood up and saw a wooden house hidden in the trees. I could see the shadows of a man and a woman behind the curtain, but they seemed to be arguing. This aroused my curiosity, and I walked slowly towards the house to see who they were. Then I read the name on the door, Mr. and Mrs. Gibson. I had never heard of them, but that didn't surprise me, because they lived far away from everything. I walked up to the front door to hear what they were saying, and I could hear something of their fight. "I'll never let you have the key, you're a fucking junkie and you don't deserve my hard-earned money." The woman yelled something about a witch, and suddenly I heard a punch. Mr. Gibson slapped his wife, and I saw her fall to the floor through the crack under the door. This was quite a shock to me. It was the first time I had ever seen that kind of violence in a couple, as my parents never physically or verbally assaulted each other like that in my house. Another thing that caught my attention was the word junkie, since I had never heard it in my life, and if I had known at that moment what it meant, I surely would not have done what I did later. After Mr. Gibson hit his wife, the argument escalated and became more violent. I remember she started hitting him with a broomstick, while he dodged the blows as best he could and kept trying to hit her again. But Mrs. Gibson was quite fierce. Seeing that things had gotten that bad, I thought about turning around, but when I peeked out again, I saw that there was a window broken on one side, and the curtain was torn in one corner. That was the signal to look out a little more, so I went over there, and that's when, there in the dining room, I saw a huge bowl full of candy. At that moment, I knew that this was my chance to get a good loot, because they wouldn't recognize me for sure, so I decided to go to the door and ring the bell. I heard some footsteps, and suddenly a badass-looking guy opened the door, letting out a cloud of smoke from his cigarette. "What do you want?" "No candy here. Get lost, you spoiled brat," he said, and slammed the door right in my face. Another one more giving me a rude answer, but at that point I didn't care anymore. I just knew that this was my only chance not to go home empty-handed, so I came up with a plan. In light of what they wouldn't give me the treats willingly, I went to the back of the house, and luckily, I thought at the time, I found a doggy door right next to the back door. I knew they didn't have dogs because since arriving I hadn't heard any barking, so I crouched down near the back door, silently waiting for my chance. The voices were still in the living room, so if I went in now, I would be caught in an instant. So I decided to be patient and wait for the right moment to act. Finally, the discussion died down, and there was silence for a few minutes. Then I saw Mrs. Gibson come up the stairs, probably heading for her room, and a few seconds later her husband came up as well. Yes, great, I thought. Now was the time. I ducked down and entered through the doggy door with no problem. As I entered, the first thing I noticed was that the house had a funny smell, as if some strange weed had been burned in there. I didn't want to waste any more time, so I slowly crawled under the dining room table, staying there for a few more seconds, just to make sure things were already calm and the couple had fallen asleep. Once I was sure they wouldn't come down, I grabbed the bowl and emptied all the candy into my bucket. I couldn't believe what a great haul I had made. My bucket was now full of knickknacks, and I came across a huge chocolate bar. What more could I ask for? After emptying everything, I set the bowl down on the table carefully, ready to leave. But just when I thought everything was going to be okay, a piercing scream broke the silence, followed by a gunshot. After that, everything went quiet. My heart skipped a beat and started beating frantically. I couldn't believe what I had heard. Had it really been a gunshot? At that moment, I thought about running away and escaping from there as fast as possible, but before I could do anything, I heard footsteps running down the stairs. With no other options, I rushed into the living room and hid under the couch, completely terrified. From there, I saw brown, somewhat worn boots approaching the kitchen sink. It was Mr. Gibson. I heard him furiously washing his hands, then he went to lock the front door and the back with keys, including the dog door. Great, I couldn't escape the way I had come in. Now what was I going to do? I was in a tremendous mess. As an 8-year-old, I tried not to panic and think about how to escape. Then I remembered seeing that right where the kitchen sink was, there was a sliding window with one of the panes missing and covered only by a curtain, so I could climb up on the counter and escape through there. But before I could move, I heard a strange noise, something heavy crawling down the stairs. I could hear the grunting of Mr. Gibson, who seemed to be carrying something very heavy. I knew this wasn't good, but I had no idea what a creepy scene I was about to see. Suddenly I looked up a little more and saw Mr. Gibson dragging his wife down the stairs. Her body was completely limp and soaked in blood. I froze and my legs began to tremble as I saw his big empty eyes staring at me as blood poured from his mouth. I was terrified, and although I wanted to scream, I knew that would only make me her next target. Mrs. Gibson's blood began to flow towards me, so I backed away, but soon realized I didn't have enough room and ended up staining my hands and sleeves red. It was the scariest thing I had ever experienced. Mr. Gibson paused near the dining room table for a moment. Then he turned and said in a growling voice, "Did you steal my candy?" Oh God, he knew. Now he was sure there was no way he could get out of there alive. "Come here, little one, I won't hurt you. I have more candy for you," he said in a feigned voice. But I knew it was a bluff, and that what really awaited me was a bloody end like Mrs. Gibson. He began to search the living room for me, turning and kicking furniture in his path. When he approached the couch, I jumped up just before he could catch me and kicked him in the nether regions almost on instinct. He hunched over in pain, and I took the opportunity to run out into the kitchen to escape through the window I had previously seen, and I almost made it there, but then he shot me. I froze for a moment, trying to figure out where he had hit me, but luckily, he missed. The bullet went through the coat he was wearing and almost went through me, but seeing that it missed me, I jumped over the counter and escaped through the broken window. I could hear his footsteps behind me, through the dark trees, but I kept running without looking back. Finally, I saw the city lights. I could hear my parents calling my name and realized they must have been worried sick. When I saw my dad standing in the street, I ran to him and jumped into his arms. He hugged me very tightly, as did my mom, and then I began to tell them everything that had happened in a rush, completely revved up with fear and shock. My parents immediately called the police, and they went to the Gibson house. When they searched the place, they found not only Mrs. Gibson's lifeless body, but also her dead dog in the bathtub, but no trace of Mr. Gibson. This man was never found and is still on the city's most wanted list. After that, I never went trick-or-treating again and became calmer. I learned that breaking into other people's houses is not a good plan. The last time I was almost killed. This story happened to me a few years ago, when I was 13 years old, and to this day recalling the events of that night fills me with bewilderment. I am the oldest of 3 siblings. My younger brother Chris was 9 and my sister Sophia was only 7. They were a pair of very naughty little boys, and I was already at that stage of wanting to be treated like an adult. That Halloween, my parents decided to take us to a family event. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go because I felt like I was going to miss out on the fun with my friends that night. But in the end, I didn't complain too much. We were almost there, and in the car, Chris was dressed up as a pirate, and Sophia looked like a sparkly fairy with her frosted wings. My mom kept insisting that I wear a costume too, but I didn't want to. I felt too old to dress up in elaborate costumes like my little brothers. So in the end, I just wore a sweater with a skull design so as not to complicate things and my mom wouldn't get too intense. When we arrived, we all went downstairs and approached the huge building. After waiting in line for a bit, Dad handed the tickets to the guy at the entrance and we finally got in. Truth be told, we could barely fit in the hallway. The lighting was dim at first, and it was decorated with a lot of scary stuff. Pumpkins, ghosts, skulls, red lights, and a lot of spooky details. When we got to the end of the hallway, we had to turn left, and suddenly, a guy in a black and red striped shirt appeared. His face was disfigured, and he had a glove with blades in his hand. He also looked like he had been nailed. It really scared me. Chris and Sophia started screaming like crazy, while my dad laughed at them. "They're easy to scare," he said. I wasn't scared, yes, I was shocked when he suddenly appeared, and I admit I screamed like a little girl the first time I saw him. But it was only because of the terrifying surprise. Afterwards, I just knew he was a guy dressed up from a horror series from the 80s or 90s, so I just thought, what fools, is that supposed to be scary? We continued our tour, and as we did, we saw on the wall a basket full of candy. "Don't you want some, Nick?" my mom asked. "No thanks." Meanwhile, Chris was there trying to get candy, so we continued on, and I started to think that this event was more like those old movies my parents used to watch, as most of the characters that appeared were, shall we say, somewhat old-fashioned. On our way, we passed by a lot of people in costumes, and every time some character appeared, Chris and Sophia squealed, and that was starting to annoy me because we were moving at a snail's pace. I decided to hurry up a bit, and as we passed some black curtains, I suddenly heard Dad's voice right behind me, followed by my brother's screams. My parents were laughing. I felt like they were making fun of us, and I thought, what the heck is this about? Is this for real? At that point, Mom said, "Aren't you going to get your candy, Nick?" She had asked Chris the same question when she freaked out, and that infuriated me. As I told you, I was entering my teenage years, and I was at that stage where I hated being treated like a child and was very easily irritated. So in a fit of rage, I yelled, "That's enough! I hate this! I want to leave!" and started walking towards the exit, or what I thought was the exit. It wasn't long before someone grabbed my shoulder. "Hey Nick, where do you think you're going?" And, "What the hell was that? What kind of way is that to treat your mother?" my dad said sternly. At that point, I looked at my mom and I could see her disappointed face. That made me feel bad, so I apologized to her, a little uncomfortable for the moment. I told her I was having a hard time with all this weird and creepy stuff in that place. I tried to wiggle out of Dad's grip by moving my shoulder, but he was still holding me. I don't like this. It gives me a bad feeling," I blurted out. "Don't say stuff like that," he snapped back. "Dad, I'm not a kid anymore." At that point, I let go of his grip, and in an attempt to detach myself from them, I started dodging people, ignoring their screams and the monsters trying to scare me. Seriously, I just wanted to get out of there. As I walked, I noticed a section of the wall that didn't seem to fit, and it was a bit uncovered. As I was walking around looking for the exit, I approached some stairs that led to a door. Quietly, I slipped through there, closing the black curtain tightly behind me so they wouldn't know where I had gone. I went down the stairs and found myself in front of a huge metal door that said, "Exit," and without a second thought, I tried to open it, but it was locked. "Oh great," I muttered. Even though I knew it wasn't going to work, I kept trying until I got frustrated and gave it a good whack. At that point, I started to hear a strange noise coming from the other side of the door. It sounded like some kind of grunting. Then I thought, oh no, this is part of the event, right? I decided to keep walking down the hallway to the left. At first, I thought it was a dead end until I saw a wooden door on the right which looked old and neglected. After struggling a bit, I managed to open it, and as I entered, I noticed that the room was full of old furniture, but at the back there was like a path, so I went in and closed the door. I was about to continue walking when, suddenly, something appeared behind a metal column. It was a pale, bald, and completely naked figure, crawling on all fours. My heart immediately skipped a beat. "What the hell is that?" I muttered with my voice in a whisper. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore. This is weird. This place sucks. I want to get out of here," I thought. But suddenly the ground vibrated under my feet and the creature emitted a strange shriek, which couldn't have come from a human being. I started to feel dizzy, so I turned and tried to open the door, but it was locked. No, 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 it can't be. A shiver ran down my back as I realized that this creature had stopped screeching and was now staring at me with creepy reptilian eyes. At that moment, I made the decision to throw myself towards a shelf so that I could escape without having to face it. But suddenly I felt a long, cold hand grab my ankle. "Let go of me!" I screamed in panic. I began to struggle to break free from the creature's grip or whatever it was. Then I kicked it and finally managed to break free. I immediately ran to the metal door I came in through, but this time, I was able to open it and get out. I closed the door behind me as fast as I could, with my heart racing and feeling fear invade me from head to toe. I immediately ran up the stairs and away from there as if I was being chased by demons, although that didn't seem too far from the truth. I don't have a clear memory of what happened next, but I know I ran and ran through a lot of nooks and crannies until I finally found my family. I told them what I had seen, and we all decided to talk to the event staff. "What exactly did you see there?" one of the managers asked me. "I don't know exactly. There was something weird and dangerous," I told them. "You're not supposed to have that." The employee, visibly confused, just said, "I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing like that here." Long story short, basically no one did anything, so my parents, my siblings, and I just left the place. And to this day, I still wonder if it was all some kind of joke, or if there really is something scary locked in that basement. It was Halloween 2011, and my boy and I were in the living room enjoying a horror movie. The tension and suspense of the movie made our hearts beat like crazy, and every once in a while we jumped up and down on the couch. Then, when I turned and looked at him, with that sparkle in his eyes, I couldn't help but hug him, trying to forget about the screams and scares happening on the screen. The movie was Scream 4, and my boyfriend was so excited that he kept talking about it on the phone for days before he decided to watch it with me. But after a while I got bored, that moment when you realize you can't take any more, so I started exaggerating my yawns and making a sleepy face. "Hey, I think I should go give candy to the kids out trick-or-treating," I said. I thought Alex would want to join me, but no, he just wanted to stay home. "I better go to sleep, I have to work tomorrow," he said as he went upstairs. After my boyfriend went to sleep, I turned off all the lights in the house, leaving the porch lights on, and sat in a chair near the front door, ready to greet the little ones looking for treats. As I waited, I glanced at my phone to see what my friends were doing at their Halloween parties, and they seemed to be having a great time. It wasn't long before a couple of kids knocked on the door. I opened it and they immediately yelled, "Trick or treat," in unison. I handed them handfuls of candy, trying to empty the bowl before the night was over. I remember a lot of the kids were wearing Scream costumes. It was kind of the trend of the moment back then. As the night progressed, my candy ran out, so I decided to turn off the porch lights and go back to the living room to watch something on TV to make me sleepy. But just as I was approaching, I heard a knock on the door, louder than before. I tried to ignore it, thinking that if I pretended not to listen, the kids would give up and go home, but the one on the other side didn't seem to understand and kept banging, which started to irritate me. But I remembered they were just kids and took a deep breath, so I went into the foyer and flung open the door. I had intended to politely tell them that there was no more candy left, but what I saw froze me in my tracks. In front of me stood a tall guy wearing a Scream mask, his long slasher tongue giving him a creepy vibe. Truth be told, that guy definitely didn't look like a kid. He was tall, with huge shoulders, and when he tilted his head and spoke in that cavernous voice, I froze instantly. I wanted to close the door, but I panicked that he might try to force it shut and do like in the horror movies. I stared at him, and I couldn't figure out what was going through his mind behind that mask. Suddenly, he held out his bag and said to me, "I'm so happy to be in your candy store. And no, I don't want to lick your lollipop, but I do want some good candy, so fill it up until it won't fit anymore." I couldn't help but notice the double entendre in his words, and his tone was so threatening that it made me sweat buckets. Still, I tried to act like everything was fine. "Happy Halloween, your costume is great," I told him, hoping he wouldn't notice how much I was shaking inside. But then the mood changed drastically. He stood up, put his hands away, and stared at me. "Do I look like a clown to you?" he asked. At that moment, everything got weird. Something wasn't right. It wasn't normal for an adult to come trick-or-treating alone at that hour, especially when most people were already asleep. I tried to gather some courage and blurted out, "Leave me alone or I'll call the police." I pulled the door hard with the intention of slamming it shut, but my blood ran cold when I realized he stuck his foot in to keep it from closing. I had no doubt that this guy came with bad intentions, so I yelled as loud as I could, and just then, the guy slipped into my house and slammed the door behind him. The man reached behind his pants and pulled out a huge knife, and at that moment, panic set in. Without a second thought, I ran up the stairs with him at my heels. When I got to my room, I quickly closed the door and realized that something was strange. I looked over at the bed, and instead of my boyfriend, there was a pile of pillows. At that moment, I heard the guy's footsteps behind. I turned suddenly and saw that now the man was in the doorway, slowly moving forward with the knife in his hand. "Come on, honey. Are you expecting someone to come and save you? If you only knew how much I hate loud, annoying girls like you." At that moment, something clicked in my head, and even though his voice was distorted, I could recognize something familiar in his tone. "Alex, is that you?" He started laughing and said to me, "Wow, so good it was coming along," as if it was really funny, and that was definitely Alex's voice. I took a deep breath and relaxed, knowing it was my stupid boyfriend playing a prank on me to scare me on Halloween. Alex took off his mask and I walked over to him to tap him on the shoulder and reproach him for scaring me. But then he stopped guffawing and looked at me in a strange way. His eyes had an intensity in them that for some reason made me feel very uneasy. He was smiling, but somehow that smile didn't match the sinister gleam in his eyes. "Is something wrong, Alex?" I asked. "Yes, you weren't supposed to recognize me, but you did." "Of what?" The words died in my mouth as I felt a stabbing pain in my abdomen. I stood completely paralyzed and in shock as Alex plunged the knife into my stomach. I looked up and stared at him with wide eyes, only to meet the most chilling look I've ever seen in my life. 1,000 things went through my mind at that moment. I wanted to know why he was doing this, but I was unable to utter a word. Instead, I just stared at him until I felt my body fade away and my vision began to blur. Then he, with that same sinister expression full of evil, said, "I'm sorry, my dear," and gave me another stab. After that, everything went black and I collapsed to the floor. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital bed, with a bunch of braces attached to my body and my entire abdominal area bandaged. My mother was by my side, and it was she who told me what happened after my boyfriend stabbed me. It happens that a neighbor who was awake at that time saw the disguised guy knocking on my door, and she thought it was suspicious, so she was watching to see what he would do. That's when she saw that I tried to close the door and he managed to force his way in while I let out a scream. Like me, at first she had no idea it was Alex. She thought it was a burglar trying to rob me, so she called the police. As it turned out, when Alex was trying to sneak out the front door, after stabbing me and leaving me for dead, he ran head-on into the police car that had just arrived. He tried to sneak out through the backyard but was finally caught. And when the officers entered the house, they found me lying on the floor of my room in a pool of blood. At first they thought I was dead, but when they took my pulse, they realized I was still alive, so they immediately transported me to the nearest hospital. My mother told me that I came very close to dying that night. Even the doctors did not give my mother much hope, due to the severity of my wounds and the massive blood loss. But miraculously, I managed to survive, and this mainly because I was assisted in time, before I bled to death. That neighbor was definitely my guardian angel that night. Alex was finally sentenced to 18 years in prison for attempted murder, a sentence that I thought was quite low for someone who premeditated the murder of his partner in a cold manner, and without showing an ounce of compassion or remorse. But the justice of men is far from perfect, Alex and I had been dating for 6 months, and I never knew what the motive behind his attack was. We had no problems. I had nothing he might want to take from me, like money or jewelry or anything of value, that is. There didn't seem to be any other reason for wanting to murder me other than the mere pleasure of doing it. Thinking about that still gives me chills. This is a reminder that monsters do exist, and sometimes they are closer than we think. The celebration of Halloween is something that is deeply rooted in American culture and is usually a cause for celebration and fun, but not for me. Every October 31st, the only thing I feel is utter dread. It's not that I'm scared of the supposed monsters roaming around or the stories of demons we are told. My real terror is the sound of little children's feet on the street begging for candy. And this experience I'll tell you about is the reason for it all. 5 dozen years ago, I was very excited because I had finally bought a house and it was newly remodeled. At the time, all I could think about was how amazing my new home was. I had been doing shots of this house for a while, and all of a sudden, I had the opportunity to buy it. I didn't even think about it. It took all my savings, but I was happy with this new acquisition. Up to that point, the most important one for me. The house not only looked great, but the price was a bargain, as it had suffered a horrible fire some time ago, which I didn't know much about. But that's why the sale was so low. That was one of the reasons I decided to buy it. Moving into this new house represented a new beginning for both me and my 2-year-old daughter, Mia. Being a single mom wasn't easy, but Mia was the best thing in my life, and I was determined to give her what she needed. The first few months were great. I adjusted well and made a lot of friends in the neighborhood. With summer coming to an end, Halloween was fast approaching, and decorations were starting to pop up everywhere. I was excited to celebrate my first Halloween in the neighborhood. It was October 31st, 2012. The day was great. People in costumes filled the streets, and at 5:30 I started to hear knocking on the door. I opened and saw a group of adorable kids all dressed up and smiling, shouting "Trick or treat." I gave them as much candy as I could, and they left very happy. The next few hours were a fun replay of that scene. Every time a new group arrived, my heart filled with joy. I thought about how cute Mia would be when she was older and could dress up and go trick-or-treating. I spent the night handing out candy until it got too late. It was around 11 p.m. when the tapping on the door finally stopped. I realized that I had run out of candy and decided it was time to close up shop, so I turned out the lights and went to check on Mia, who was already sleeping peacefully in her room. After brushing my teeth, I crawled into bed, but it wasn't many minutes before loud banging on the door woke me with a start. I looked at the clock on the nightstand and saw that it was 1:02 a.m. I was in shock, wondering who could be calling at this hour. I decided to go downstairs to see what was going on, so I went downstairs and opened the door, and there were 2 children. It was dark, so I couldn't make out their faces very well. The first one looked to be about 9 years old, and holding his hand was a girl about 6 who I guessed was his sister. Before I could say anything, they both yelled, "Trick or treat," at the same time. I didn't understand what those kids were doing out of their house so late, so I blurted out, "Hey, it's really late, you guys. You should go home to bed. I'm out of candy." At that point, I noticed they looked annoyed that I didn't have anything for them. They both frowned and repeated, "Trick or treat," with a pretty intense tone. I started to get a little scared and said, "Hey, really? You guys should go home. It's not safe to be here, and this is no time to play." All I got in return was a heavy silence and their anger-laden stares. Since I thought they were playing games, I wished them good night and closed the door. I walked up the stairs thinking about how weird this all was. A few minutes passed and I started hearing strange noises coming from the kitchen. I thought there might be burglars, so I grabbed a tripod from the cupboard and ran to see what was going on. But when I got there, I froze. The same 2 kids were in my kitchen, and one of them was holding a lighter. The smell of gas began to fill the air, and I saw that the stove was on full blast. Before I could say a word, I heard the click of the lighter, and suddenly the kitchen burst into flames. In a matter of seconds, the fire spread everywhere. I was surrounded by a sea of burning flames and watched in horror as my house burned. But even more terrifying, I saw the children, who were now engulfed in flames, laughing out loud as if it was very funny. I watched dumbfounded as the flames consumed their skin, and the smell of burning flesh began to invade the room. But the worst thing was to realize that they were still unperturbed, as if they were enjoying being burned alive. They kept laughing as the flames consumed them. It was a horrible scene that left me paralyzed for a moment, my mind in shock, trying to process what was unfolding in front of my eyes. Suddenly, I heard small screams coming from upstairs, and that's when I remembered that my daughter was still in her room. Without a second thought, I went upstairs, but before I reached her door, a huge piece of burning debris fell from the ceiling and blocked my path. I tried to move it, but there was no way. The entrance was completely obstructed. Completely panicked and beginning to feel the heat of the flames on my own skin, I tried to back away and go down the stairs to get help, but the staircase was also covered in flames and the roof was collapsing around me. In that instant, I felt an overwhelming despair as I heard my baby's screams echoing through the house. There are no words to describe the horror and helplessness I felt hearing my little girl dying, without me being able to do anything about it. The pain was unbearable. As a mother, it was as if someone was ripping out my insides. At that point, the smoke began to fill everything and I was having a hard time breathing. I felt like I was suffocating and fell to my knees on the floor. I could no longer hear my daughter crying, and everything around me began to go dark. At that moment, I began to give up. I had no escape and no reason to want to survive. My little girl was dead, devoured by the flames, and I just wanted to leave with her. But then, I felt hands lifting me off the ground. But the next few moments were a total blur. All I know is that before I knew it, I was out of the house and surrounded by firefighters. I started screaming. As soon as I had some consciousness, the first thing I did was scream, "My daughter, she's still inside, help her, please save my little girl." The firemen rushed in, but the house started to collapse again and I knew it was in vain. As I watched everything crumble with my little girl inside, I felt like I was also dying with her and could only cry with all my heart. Eventually, my pain turned to anger and I cursed those children who caused all this. I decided to call the police. Now, the only thing left for me was to seek justice. I was taken to the police station and gave my statement, but as I did so, the officers looked at me as if I was crazy. When I told about those children laughing as they burned, they looked at each other and then at me like I was a lunatic, but I stood my ground because I knew what I had seen. The police searched the place and only found the body of my 2-year-old daughter. There was no trace of those children, which filled me with fury. I demanded that they do something to find them because my daughter's death could not go unpunished. The policeman took me to a sketch artist, and I tried to remember every detail, although I admit I didn't get a good look at the children. It took about 3 hours before they finished the sketches, and when they finally did, all the cops looked puzzled when they saw the drawing, and started looking at me as if I had grown a horn on my head. The older cop then asked me, "Are you sure these are the same angry, frustrated kids you saw?" "Yes, it's them, I know what I saw," I yelled back. "Now can you find them and make them face what they did?" The officer looked at me with a serious expression and said, "Well, that's complicated. If these are really the guys you saw, I can assure you they couldn't have done that because I know them well." His tone began to make me uncomfortable, but I didn't have time to reply. He continued, "Those children perfectly match the description of the Harrisons, who are the children of the family that lived in your house before. I assure you that they cannot be to blame because the whole family died tragically in a similar fire 5 years ago." Her response left me totally bewildered, confused, and terrified. I had nothing to say. I left the police station with my head pounding. I knew it sounded crazy to think that those dead kids could be responsible for the fire, but strangely, a part of me began to accept the idea. All the weird things that had happened that night began to click in my head. After burying my daughter, I decided to leave town and go back to live with my mother. Most days I find myself reflecting on what happened. It is sad to think that there is no justice system for those restless spirits that go around harming the living and taking the lives of innocents, like my little girl. There is nothing I could do to make myself feel better. Sometimes I catch myself wishing I had given them a couple of pieces of candy that night. Maybe if I had, those kids would have left my daughter and me alone. It's been 12 years and today my little girl would be 14. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't remember her, as well as those infernal kids who took her away from me. I hate Halloween, and I will forever. It was Halloween, and my parents had gone to an adult party at a friend's house, leaving me, a 14-year-old boy, and my sister, who was 12, home alone. It would be our turn to hand out candy to the neighborhood kids. We lived on a small farm, surrounded by more farms, so Halloween here was always pretty quiet. My sister was already at that stage where dressing up and trick-or-treating seemed like a total embarrassment to her, while I preferred to stay home and play video games with my friends. The only problem was that my parents forgot to buy candy. They told us we had to split whatever we found in the kitchen, so we were left with fruit and pretzels. That was a little embarrassing since the kids were only expecting to get knickknacks on the one night of the year they were allowed. But I wasn't that concerned, because there weren't many kids in our area, so we figured we wouldn't have to open the door too much. We handed out the first batch of apples, and you could already see the disappointment on the kids' faces. When evening came, we assumed we were done, as it was almost 11 p.m., but just as we were about to relax, someone knocked on the door. It was late, and I really didn't want to open it again, but I thought it might be little kids and I didn't want to seem rude, so I went over, opened the door, and was shocked to see 4 very tall guys standing there dressed in robes and holding open pillowcases, as if they were expecting candy. Sorry guys, we're out of candy. We've been handing out apples all night, but I have some pretzels if you want some, I told them somewhat nervously. The tallest of them all looked at me like I was speaking another language, and none of them said a word. I didn't know what else to do, so I tried to close the door, but just as I was about to close it all the way, one of the guys stuck his shoe between the door and the frame to stop me from doing so. I opened it again to ask him what was wrong, but at that moment, he and his friends pushed the door open and burst in. "Run and hide!" I yelled to my sister immediately, but before I could react, they pushed me to the ground. One of them pulled out a baseball bat from under his cloak, and in a serious tone said, "We didn't come for candy." I tried to get up from the floor and started to sit up on my hands and knees before I was kicked in the stomach, knocking me back down. I tried to scream, but living on a farm away from the neighbors, I knew no one would hear me, yet I kept trying. "On Halloween, people don't stop to think if a kid is really screaming," one of them said to me, their mocking laughter echoing as they looked at me in those weird robes. "I don't know what you want, but I can give you money if you leave. Please don't hurt us," I told them, trembling. I expected them to take me seriously, but they just laughed. "Look at the scared little baby. Where's your daddy to save you?" one of them said as he jabbed the bat into my ribs. I tried to see their faces, and they looked too young for what they were doing, definitely not very mature. As I crawled into a corner of the room, with a stinging pain in my ribs, I listened as they discussed which rooms they were going to check and what they were going to take. 2 boys dragged me out while the others searched the house for anything they could take. At one point, I saw my sister, Louisa, hiding on the roof, peeking out of her bedroom window. The guy who had me grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me toward the barn. He opened the barn door and pushed me inside, threatening me with the bat. He made me roll around in the mud and started filming with his phone while forcing me to do ridiculous things. I was terrified, tired, confused, sore, and completely embarrassed by the humiliation I was being caused. The guy was laughing the whole time with indescribable meanness. After that, he forced me to get up and dragged me back to the house to show his other friends what he had done to me. There, the torment continued. They made me drink water from the toilet and eat things from the garbage. I couldn't even describe what they were doing to me, but as they dragged me away, I just wished they wouldn't find Louisa. It was strange. They didn't even mention her name during all this time. When they finally took me to the room, they began to take turns beating me. I had no idea what I had done to deserve such horrible treatment, but they seemed to be really enjoying what they were doing to me. I was suffering horrible psychological torture, and I didn't know when this whole nightmare was going to stop. I was beaten so badly that my whole body ached, and I almost fainted many times. After about 15 minutes of repeated beatings, one of them asked me where my sister was. He said they wanted to have fun with her, and if I told them, they would stop hurting me. At that instant, I decided not to talk anymore. They could do whatever they wanted to me, but I would not let them near Louisa. When they asked again, they spit in my face every time I refused to say anything, but they couldn't do anything else. Eventually, they tied me to a chair in the kitchen and left after rampaging through everything. I must have passed out at some point because when I woke up, I found myself in the hospital, surrounded by machines. My mom was by my side, crying with joy to see me awake. She took her time to explain everything that had happened, and when she did, I couldn't have been more horrified. It turned out that Ami, the girl I had just broken up with a week earlier, had asked her brother to scare me as revenge. Apparently, he and his friends got carried away and ended up doing horrible things. As far as I know, they were all arrested, but only Ami's brother went to jail and got 5 years for aggravated assault and trespassing offenses. The other guys managed to get off on probation in exchange for testifying against them. It's been more than 2 years since that day, and it still hurts. But what I always tell people now is that if you open the door on Halloween and your parents aren't home, for God's sake, look through the peephole first. Sometimes not everything is what it seems. Sometimes the monsters that show up trick-or-treating can be real.